Most students know what a body paragraph needs: a topic sentence, evidence, and commentary. But when I review essays, the problem is almost never missing evidence. The problem is weak commentary. Students often drop a piece of evidence and reiterate the claim in the prompt and move on. That's how you got stuck in a 130. Hey everyone, welcome to or welcome back to CT's AP Cookies. Over the past 7 years, I've helped hundreds of students score a 5 on the exam. I've studied this test inside out so you don't have to. Today, let me show you exactly how to build a body paragraph with strong commentary that earn all 4 points on evidence and commentary, and how to set yourself up for the sophistication point. I'm going to use the 2024 prompt for today's examples. Here it is. I'll give you 15 seconds to read it. You don't need to pause the video. If you watch my last video on how to brainstorm the argument essay, you'll remember the thesis structure. Valid when X, but not when Y. If you haven't watched it, click the link in the top right corner. Here's the thesis we are working with today. The claim about the value of selfies is valid when they are used as a genuine tool for self-reflection. But when selfie taking becomes driven by social validation, the practice loses its meaning and the claim no longer holds. For the valid when X but not when Y kind of thesis statement, you only need to write 2 body paragraphs, where in one paragraph you argue the supporting side and in the second you argue the limiting side. Let's build the first paragraph, the supporting side. Here's the topic sentence. When people use selfies to document personal milestones and reflect on their own growth, the practice functions exactly as Wortham describes, as a meaningful visual record of one's life. Now let's talk about the evidence. And this is where I need you to pay attention, because what you choose as evidence and how specific you get will make or break your score. Let me show you 2 versions. Think about which version is stronger and why. I'll give you 45 seconds. You don't need to pause the video. I asked my students to evaluate these 2 a few weeks ago, and many of them said, obviously the second version is better because the longer the better. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I often advocate for less is more. Repeating yourself doesn't earn you extra points and wastes your time. But in this case, I have to admit that yes, more is more, because here longer means more specific evidence and deeper commentary without being repetitive. Let's dissect the shorter version. It has a topic sentence, evidence, and commentary. Many students write paragraphs like this and think they've done enough. But look closer. The evidence is generic. Many students take selfie at graduation. Which students? What does the photo actually capture? Why are the selfies meaningful? Let's compare it to the longer version. Consider the simple act of scrolling back through your camera roll to your first day of high school. The person in that photo, nervous, unsure, wearing an outfit you would never choose now, is barely recognizable. Pay attention to how specific the evidence is. It's not so much about the fact that people took selfies, but what the selfies were able to capture, a younger and less mature version of oneself. The scoring rubric says, focus on the importance of specific details to build an argument. And this is the level of specificity you need to achieve. Now let's compare the commentary of these two versions. In the shorter version, the writer says, these photos serve as a visual diary that captures meaningful experiences. It's just rewording the claim. Let's look at what the longer version does for commentary, especially the last sentence. The writer articulates their understanding of Wortham's claim instead of simply reiterating it. The shorter version says, selfies captures meaningful experiences. Okay, but why are they meaningful? It never answers that. The longer version, in comparison, does explain that the photo is meaningful because it preserves a version of you that no longer exists, and without it, you'd have no way to see how much you've changed. The rubric says that you need to organize and support an argument as a line of reasoning composed of multiple supporting claims, each with adequate evidence that is clearly explained. And this is what it means to clearly explain the evidence. You can't just repeat or paraphrase Wortham's claim. You need to explain why her claim is valid. In particular, her claim that selfies are proof that we were here sounds a little bit abstract. And the longer version does a great job of explaining the writer's own interpretation. This is what Wortham mean by proof that we were here. Not proof for an audience, but proof for yourself, proof of how far you've grown as a person. The writer is actively engaging with the claims in the prompt, not just passively repeating them. It's that kind of active engagement that separates a high-scoring essay from a low-scoring one. But the longer version isn't perfect. The grandmother example is really cute, but there is one problem. The grandma's photos aren't selfies. So does that mean we can't use this example anymore? Does that mean the writer just wastes their time writing the grandmother example? The good news is the problem can be fixed. A weaker writer would either ignore that problem or avoid the example entirely. But you can actually call it out in your own essay by adding a sentence like this. Granted, my grandmother's photographs are not selfies. And then explain why the evidence still holds. The technology changed, but the human need to preserve those moments did not. This is a huge sophistication move. You're acknowledging a limitation in your own evidence and then showing why your argument survives it. The rubric calls this articulating the implications or limitations of an argument. When you explain how your evidence isn't perfect but still supports your claim, you're showing AP readers that you're thinking critically, not just stacking evidence. So this is the body paragraphs that score all 4 points for evidence and commentary, as well as the 1 point for sophistication. Now let's build the second body paragraph, the limiting side. This is where most students lose the sophistication point because they either skip the pivot entirely or write a weak counterargument that feels like an afterthought. Here's the topic sentence. However, when selfie taking is driven by the desire for likes, follower, and external approval, it stops being a personal diary and becomes a performance, stripping away the authenticity that makes Wortham's claim valid in the first place. Notice the language. Stop being a personal diary and becomes a performance. A weaker writer would say sometimes I agree, but sometimes I don't, without specifying the exact point where agreement becomes disagreement. But this topic sentence specifies it by distinguishing between personal diary and performance. And here's the full paragraph. Let me break down what makes this paragraph work. First, the pivot is real, not cosmetic. The writer isn't saying, I only partly agree. The writer is being very specific about when and where an agreement becomes a disagreement. Second, the evidence is again specific. The paragraph uses the example of a classmate retaking a selfie 14 times to illustrate how selfies become performative. Third, the commentary again engages with the claims in the prompt rather than restating them, especially when the writer says, Wortham's framing of selfies as a visual diary assumes a private audience. Articulating the assumption of Wortham's claim really shows that the writer is thinking critically. The last 3 sentences articulate the limitation of Wortham's claims, especially the last sentence. Wortham's claim does not account for what selfies have become in the age of social media. The writer really understands the assignment. That's your extent to which doing its job all the way through the essay, not just in the thesis. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I can't write paragraphs this long during the exam. And you're right, these are slightly more developed than you would write under time conditions. But the structure is what matters. Even if your paragraphs are shorter, they need these 3 moves. 1. Specific evidence, not vague summaries. 2. For commentary, actively engage with the claims in the prompt, not just passively reiterate them. 3. Articulate the limitation of your claims or the prompts, not just using vague qualifiers like sometimes, not always, not necessarily. If every body paragraphs make these 3 moves, you're looking at a 1-for-1. And let me give you one more tip for the sophistication point. Look at the rubric's language again. Crafting a nuanced argument by consistently identifying and exploring complexities or tensions. The keyword is consistently. You don't earn sophistication with 1 or 2 good sentences. You earn it by maintaining the complexity throughout your essay. That means your supporting paragraph shouldn't just be a simple cheerleading session for the claim, and your limiting paragraph shouldn't be a flat contradiction. Both paragraphs should show that you understand the issue is more complicated than it appears. That's it for today. If you want to learn how to brainstorm your argument essay and set up and extend to which thesis, watch my previous video. I'll put a link in the top right corner. And if you're struggling with MCQ, I also have a series in which I break down the essential knowledge and show you exactly how to nail the MCQ section the most efficient way possible. And if you're struggling with essays and want personalized feedback, I offer essay review services. Check the description below for more details. Thanks for watching. See you next class.